Hi everyone, welcome back to today's Love Transformation class. And I'm pretty excited about today's class because one of my absolute favorite love coaches and the very woman that I would want to sit down and talk to about my own love life problems is back joining us for the summit again this year. Her session last year was the most highly rated one, and I know that you're going to get tons of value out of this. And we're actually going to enjoy perhaps even having a difference of opinion about the topic of narcissism today. So welcome, Miss Darcy Iverson.
Hi. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here again. We had so much fun last year. I cannot wait to have this incredible discussion and interview and just hopefully, cultivate an incredible experience for all these amazing women who are showing up for themselves.
I know that you speak a lot about narcissism and have lots to say about it and are very experienced at working with clients who have experience with narcissists. However, I have a little bit of a curiosity about this because I hear the word narcissism thrown around all the time. And in relation to men that I know probably wouldn't be clinically diagnosed as narcissistic personality disorder necessarily, they've just had a bad experience with a particular woman, or it's that relationship dynamic has brought out perhaps the worst in them. What are your thoughts? I want to hand this over to you.
Here's the issue, right? Is that number one, very rarely, if ever, do narcissists actually seek help. So the statistics that we have access to as to how many narcissists there are actually running around out in the world, we don't have the actual numbers. I mean, we don't really know how many there are, right? So do I think it's become a little bit of a buzzword? It's a little tricky to say because of a couple of factors. Number one, we don't know the actual numbers because we're dealing with a population that sees themselves as being superior to other people, which means that they rarely seek help because they don't actually want to sit in front of therapists, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, people that they deem themselves better than and talk about their problems, right? Which they don't even most of the time view themselves as having problems. So there's an issue there. There's an issue with tracking statistics. Number two, part of the issue is that for most women and men who experience female narcissism it's very difficult for these people to actually admit and actually become honest with themselves about the fact that they're in abusive relationships. Abuse is very tricky and it's very painful and it's very difficult to experience. So most of the time people cycle through these cycles of abuse and experience a tremendous amount of pain before they finally get to a point. They say the latest figure that I've seen is that it takes most women, I'll refer to women in this interview because I work with women, but that it takes women between 3 to 6 times to finally leave their abuser for good, right? And that's once they've even classified their partner as being an abuser, right? So it takes 3 to 6 times to stand up and say, hey, what's happening to me isn't okay. It's not fair. This person uses power and control. I need to get out of here. A lot of the times they're not able to get out of there because they're financially being controlled, right? So a lot of these women can't even get free. So part of the issue with narcissism being a little bit of a buzzword right now is that there are a lot of women who it takes them such a long time to even acknowledge or admit that what they're experiencing is abuse. So I get very hesitant to want to say that I think too many women are using the word narcissism because my fear is that it's going to silence the very women who need to use that word the most. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. So let's talk about what those traits are that people are categorizing as narcissistic.
Well, one thing I wanted to say real quick before we move on that I think is really important is there's certain issues that can seem like somebody's a narcissist and they aren't. like for the topic of sex addiction. So sex addicts they are also addicted to power and control. And so when a guy is active in sex addiction, it can seem like he doesn't care about his partner. It can seem that he is cruel, that he is selfish, that he is self-centered, when in reality, he's just suffering from an addiction that if he were to, let's say, join a 12-step recovery program like SAA or SLAW, if he were to go see a certified sex addiction therapist, if he were to go into a men's recovery program, if he were to go to a treatment program like the Meadows in Arizona and study under somebody like Patrick Carnes, and he were to actually get sober from his addiction, he would become available for intimacy and partnership. And he would actually become one of the most amazing partners that exists, right? So there are things like that that I think are being classified as narcissists that aren't, right? Like alcoholism, drug addiction, sex addiction. There's some others, but that's the concern I have, is that are people walking away from relationships with people who are struggling with ailments that are very treatable and calling them narcissists and dismissing them as that when they're actually dealing with an issue that's very treatable. Does that make sense?
It does, and that's good to know. Let's talk about the general population. What are some of the behavioural traits, do you think, that a regular guy who doesn't suffer any personality disorder might display if he's not invested or not interested in a relationship that women potentially are misreading as narcissistic personality disorder?
They're very focused on getting their own needs met, right? So that person would not be focused on you, and they would not be relational, and they would not be available for intimacy, and they would not be available to show up for your needs in any kind of way, right?
Yeah, how would we be able to tell the difference between someone who was actually a narcissist? How would we notice in their behaviour compared to someone who was a regular guy with no clinical diagnosis but just behaving badly? How would we be able to tell the difference?
Well, one difference that's pretty critical is that narcissists lack empathy. So narcissists genuinely don't feel any kind of empathy for any of the pain that you experience. So I remember years ago, this was a long time ago, when I was 25 or 26, I spent 5 years in a relationship with a sex addict. And I didn't know at first. I had no idea. I just knew that he was very avoidant, and, he would sometimes be really emotionally available and loving, and other times he would be extremely avoidant. And I didn't know until a woman gave me the book Facing Love Addiction by P.M. Melody. And I read it and I went, oh my gosh, there's some kind of addiction going on here, right? So I, ended up confronting him and asking him some questions, and he ended up confessing everything to me. And so we ended up getting him enrolled in a program and getting him help. We ended up going to couples therapy. And he ended up saying in the couples session to me, when I see you in pain around my addiction, like when I know that, so I'll just be very vulnerable in this interview because I think it's good for women to hear this, but he had a relapse, and we had this software on the computer so that he couldn't look at porn, and he had crashed the computer. And I had come downstairs in the morning and the computer was crashed, right? Because he had somehow managed to override the password to the software. And I came downstairs and I was like, why is the computer crashed? And he said, I don't know. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? We have cats and dogs and you. The cats and the dogs didn't crash the computer. And he said, I don't know what you're getting so upset about. He kind of played it off or whatever. And I started to cry. And I said, wow, I thought we were past this. Well, what he said in the therapy session was, he said, when I saw you crying like that, it hurts so much. And felt this defensiveness. Like I felt myself going, I just need to like stay with the lie because I don't want to have the fight that I knew we were going to have. But when I saw you cry like that, it like broke my heart. It like broke me. Narcissists don't necessarily, as far as we know right now, experience that kind of empathy. There's a lot of arguments, right, around narcissism developing in their childhood, and that they actually create this false self as a result of being very traumatized. And so as far as we know, there's some, nice person that exists deep inside of them that probably does feel some sort of something, but they don't display that empathy for us to see. So narcissists seem to enjoy stirring the pot and stirring you up and causing you pain and distress. And then when you would think they would want to make you feel better, they don't. They sometimes want to make you feel worse. So there's a lack of empathy there that with addicts and alcoholics and other, disorders, we don't see that. We see the empathy, even if we don't see it right away.
I know with a lot of men, it's helpful sometimes to, if you're trying to explain to them about a situation that you're upset about, is to like paint the reverse picture and say, imagine if this was you and da-da-da. And then, and you see a lot of times when you go, okay, I get it. So that kind of understanding and empathy and being able to put themselves in your shoes is exactly what you're talking about. What about the men who are just out there and behaving badly? We know that with, Tinder and all of the social media opportunities we have and online dating, there's a lot of men that are juggling a lot of things, a lot of women, a lot of dating, a lot of, and having like a little regard for the human being that exists, that they're, playing with their emotions.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of men out there who are behaving badly and making, choices that are poor choices that are causing a lot of harm. I think that, something that I work with my clients a lot on, and I know that you do too as well, is being aware of what some of those red flags are and making decisions, not necessarily protective measures, but making decisions as an empowered woman, as an empowered dater, so that you can kind of prevent some of that stuff from happening. I had a conversation on Sunday with a really amazing woman who I've known for a very long time, who we both have the experience of being with abusive men. And one of the things that we both really related with one another is that there were red flags. There were red flags in the beginning, and they weren't like huge, massive, overwhelming red flags, but they were significant red flags that we could have turned around at any time. We could have been like, oh yeah, this isn't going to work. I need to get out of here. And we didn't do that, right? Now, did either one of us know we were walking into abusive relationships? No, not at all. But with narcissists, there's typically there are red flags in the beginning, and they kind of all just show up in the same way in the beginning. Like they kind of all have the same behaviors. Like love bombing is a very classic narcissistic trait that they display in the beginning of a relationship, right? Narcissists know that there is a limited window of time that they have to be able to seduce a woman into a relationship. They know, like, hey, I'm not going to show up as this, really great version of me for very long, and she's going to be able to tell that I'm not a really solid guy, so I've got to get her in as fast as I possibly can. And the way that they do that is by really overwhelming you with a lot of praise and a lot of contact and a lot of communication and being very charismatic and charming, right? And so if you meet a guy online or you meet a guy at a bar or whatever, and all of a sudden he's calling all the time and texting all the time and wants you to know how amazing you are right away and wants to be in a committed relationship with you right away, there's something that's off about that. True intimacy takes time to develop. You know, people are supposed to have full lives. And so we're not necessarily looking for a guy who all of a sudden can communicate with you all day long, every day. We want a guy who has friends and has family and doesn't abandon himself in his pursuits to text a woman all day long, right? If a guy feels the need to command all of your attention right away, there might be a darkness that waits on the other side of that, right?
But there might be another woman that same gentleman that's doing the love bombing, she might notice those red flags, and it might be, yeah, no, there's something off about this. I'm going to step away, going to step back, and someone else is more vulnerable to that. Can you talk about the type of person perhaps that does find themselves more vulnerable, and the type of person, because it's a lot more than just noticing those red flags, right? There's more going on within us that might make us more vulnerable to that behavior.
Yeah, so there's two things that I see that make a woman very vulnerable to that kind of man. So number one is women who put themselves in a state of deprivation. And that is either by being single for a very, very long time and not dating, or, dating for like a few months, having it not work out, staying, single for years, and then putting themselves back out there, and they're in a state of like sexual love anorexia, where they're in deprivation. And so a man shows up and wants to pay attention to them, wants to show up for them, be there for them. And it feels so good because it hasn't been there in so long. And it's important, if you're in that category of woman, that you start looking at right now, how can you start making sure that you're getting your needs met now, right? Before you don't even have to join a dating app, right, to do that. How can you make sure that you're communicating with people every day, and making sure that you're texting people and talking on the phone and meeting people for dinner dates and meeting people for drinks. And I mean, even friendships, and connecting with family, and having hobbies and having interests. And how are you making sure that you have physical touch, right? Like, can you get a massage or get your nails done? Or, it's really popular now to like pay for, cuddlers, professional cuddlers, or to go to a cuddle party, or, I've had clients do that, and to make sure that you're not in a state of deprivation in any way, right? So that, you're always going to have areas that fall by the wayside, but to do the best that you can to make sure that you feel nurtured and you feel nourished and you feel like you're seen and you're heard and you're loved and you're supported, so that by the time you meet a guy, it doesn't feel like, you're a sponge and you're soaking him up. The second category for sure is women who were neglected and abandoned in their childhood, and kind of had this inconsistent caregiving, where it was like one day it was there, one day it wasn't, and back and forth. And it could be mom and dad both did that. It could be just mom did it, or just dad did it, or whatever. And that requires deep healing. That requires actually getting in the trenches and doing the work, hiring a therapist, hiring a coach. I do that work, you do that work. Really healing those dynamics. There's a really great book. It's called Insecure in Love. I love that book. I recommend it to women. You can read the book Facing Love Addiction, really learning these patterns and these dynamics to start healing and to start making progress, and understanding that having an amazing relationship is available to you, and you can have that, but you don't want somebody who wants to consume you, right? Even if it feels good in the moment or whatever, because it's control. And control takes away your rights as a human, and that doesn't feel good.
So the very first place for someone who might identify with this, or who've had this experience before, what's the first thing that you would suggest they could do right now?
So I really encourage women to be very proud of themselves that they survived. abuse is so debilitating, right? And there's a lot of, there's a lot of people who talk about being in a narcissistic relationship and don't call it abuse. And it is abuse. And it's very painful. When I was with my narcissistic partner, he was a diagnosed malignant narcissist. And we were together for 2 years. And when I left that relationship, I hit a bottom that I didn't even know was possible. I mean, I had no idea I could feel that awful. And today, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And it sounds insane to people who, hear me just say, hey, I was with an abuser. And today I'm like, that was the best thing that could ever happen to me. But what it did was it forced me to do something that I'd never done. It forced me to look at what was going on with me before I met him, right? Because, and I explained this to the woman on Sunday, right? And what it forced me to do was it forced me to look at the state I was in before I met him. It's so easy as victims of abuse or survivors of abuse to blame it all on the abuser and to go, oh my God, he did all these horrible things. I left him. I was a train wreck. I can't believe that happened. For me, I found myself getting really stuck in that and kind of like going down, 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 down. And I remember one day I was in a therapy session and I looked at my therapist and I went, right before I met him, I was really unhappy. And she was like, that's new. And I was like, I know. I was really unhappy. Like I didn't feel beautiful. I, felt kind of lost in my career. I was feeling like, kind of insecure around some friendships. And when he showed up, all he wanted to do was talk to me and tell me how beautiful I was and tell me, how proud he was of me and how amazing I was and how he never met a woman like me in his entire life. And when he said that, all that attention allowed me to forget all of that. And I had no idea in a million years that I was walking into a relationship that was going to make all of that so much worse. But I really hit a bottom and was able to see, oh my gosh, like I was so unhappy before I met him. And it allowed me to like really take a look at my self-responsibility. And it allowed me to take a look at that I was running myself into a wall, right? That was happening way before he ever showed up. He just magnified all of that for me in really beautiful ways. And so I became the very best Darcy that I had ever become by doing all that work. And by looking at my childhood and looking at how my childhood set me up to have the kind of mindset where I wasn't happy and didn't do anything about it. And how I felt like I was a victim a lot. And the person that I am today, I don't even recognize who I used to be. So I always encourage women, number one, to be so freaking proud of yourself that you survived, because it is scary and it is rough in there. And number two, to look at where were you before you even met him? Was life really a bowl of like cherries or whatever that saying is from like the 50s? I don't know. But like, was life really that great before you met him? Or were you already starting to struggle and that's why you were an energetic match for him? And if that's the truth, well, then that puts you on a pretty good playing field, because then you have all the power, right? And then you get to go in and you get to heal all that stuff. And you get to know, like, this is your world and you get to create it. And you get to create it however you want it to look. And to ask yourself, who am I without him, right? Before it's too late. Like, who am I without this guy around telling me that I'm not smart enough and I'm not pretty enough and I'm not, incredible enough and I'm not going to be enough? Like, who are you without that voice? Because that voice is gone. Mm-hmm. And at that point, your options become literally limitless. I know for me, I moved on. I got into a relationship. I became an online dating coach, which, trust me, shocked everybody. And now I've helped women all over the world get married. And now I have, my first client's pregnant and it's going to have a baby. So, the world is waiting for you.
It's such beautiful advice. And even for those that haven't been involved in a excuse me, in a narcissistic relationship, I think that advice of taking personal responsibility, in the minute that you do that, you're no longer a victim to this, you know, my love life is so shitty, or this isn't fair that I've had this horrible experience. Just the decision to feel empowered by saying, like, this is my responsibility. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and again, sort of circling right back to the beginning, because I still feel like, I know this is a sensitive topic, but I still feel like there are a lot of women in shitty relationship experiences blaming their ex or their partner for how they're being treated. What else would you recommend that we could do, even if it's not necessarily with a narcissistic or an addictive personality, if we're just having consistently bad experiences in relationships?
I mean, ultimately, I don't think, other than naming and claiming it so that it has the power to wake you up and pull you out of the dynamic that you're in so that you can do the healing, I don't think what it is matters much more past that point, if that makes sense. Like, the only time I talk about my old partner being a narcissist is when people ask me about it and it comes up in conversation, because I don't give it that bandwidth anymore, if that makes sense. Like, I just don't need to. And I am so focused on me, and the way that I was able to change my experience around that and was able to attract what I wanted is I recognized that and again, this is tricky saying this, I recognized that I had had breakdown after breakdown in all these unhealthy relationships. And so I chose to look at it as I was the common denominator. And so for me, what I saw was that even though, yes, I attracted an abuser, right? All of my relationships had failed except for 2. All of them were unhealthy. So for me, I was less concerned about whether my partner was a narcissist or not, or an abuser or not. I was more concerned about the fact that I'd had so many breakdowns in relationships. I was much more concerned at looking at the entire picture, if you will, and seeing, wow, I'm fairly young and I've had so many toxic relationships. Like, what is going on with me? And that was much more empowering for me to look at it that way than looking at it as, well, I was with a sex addict, I was with a narcissist. Like, you know, I just looked at it as, wow, I've been through a lot of relationships that were really freaking toxic and really overwhelming. Like, what is going on here? What is the dynamic at play? How do I shift this? How do I change this? And I think there are always going to be people who do not assume responsibility for their results and are always going to blame men for their relationship not working, just like I think there are always going to be men who blame women for, you know, their results or whatever. And I think that's going to happen no matter what the relationship is, whether it's narcissism or infidelity or, you know, somebody just being a jerk or whatever. I think it's women have to decide, do I want to assume responsibility for all my results? And if I do, what does that look like for me? Like, what does that really look like? Like, for me, I didn't look at it as I deserved the abuse that I got. I was very proud of myself for getting out. I just looked at it as I've had a lot of toxic relationships and I'm the only person who's the constant. How do I change this so my next relationship looks different? And that's what I encourage women to do, is if you're not finding a healthy relationship, let's look at your patterns. Let's look at what's going on here that you keep attracting things that aren't working for you.
Just to recap, what were a couple of those key shifts that you noticed after you did make that shift, and what you noticed in your relationships after that?
So for me, one of the shifts that I noticed is that I started treating myself exquisitely. So the way that I started handling, you know, all self-care in my life, everything from the way that I spoke to myself, to, you know, the way I cared for myself in my physical home, to most importantly, changing my mindset from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. That was the biggest shift for me, was believing that I could have whatever I wanted. I did not believe that before. And so I believed that I was going to get the best of the worst kind of thing. And so, you know, I would meet a guy who wasn't that great, and I would, you know, jump into the relationship really quickly. And then when it didn't work out, I would blame him. And then this is a very honest interview. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is being recorded.
We love it. We do.
I would, you know, I would be upset and I would break up with him and I would blame him, you know, I would move on or whatever. And I didn't think I had a chance to do much better or have a relationship that was going to be any more positive, you know? And once I changed my mindset from a fixed to a growth mindset, which is the hardest work I've ever done in my entire life, I knew that I could have whatever I wanted. I knew that anything was possible for me. And I changed that mindset while I was hanging around people who didn't believe that was possible. So when women tell me that they can't change something, I don't believe in that. I don't believe that, ever. So if a woman were to tell me, you know, hey, I was with a narcissist or an abuser and I don't believe I can have what I want, I would say, I don't believe that at all. I believe that you can have whatever you want if you put the work in and you believe in yourself, right? And so for some women, believing in themselves is the hardest work they'll ever do. And that was my key shift.
And once that key shift happens, what's something that you noticed was different in your relationship after that?
So for me, something that I noticed was I attracted my very first emotionally available partner. My shift, so all of this happened for me. I mean, this was a long time ago, but I attracted my first emotionally available partner who wanted to protect me and provide for me and show up for me and love me and just be present for me. And he thought I was like the coolest person alive. Like, he just would tell me, like, we would stay up late and talk for hours, and he would just tell me, like, you're the coolest woman I've ever dated. We weren't really women, we were young, but, you know, he would tell me, like, you're amazing, you're so cool, like, you're just so cool. And it was really sweet, and he would do really sweet things, and he showed up really, really, really well. And we dated for years before we broke up. So for me, that was the key shift, right? Was first believing that I could have whatever I wanted after I changed my mindset. And I didn't know back then, there was no blogs, there was none of this stuff existed. So I didn't know that I had a fixed mindset and then a growth mindset. I just knew that I didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe in my odds. And I knew that I was willing to do anything to change them. And I did. And then after that, the first emotionally available guy showed up, and he was awesome.
Thank you so much for being so open and sharing about your personal experience. I know there's a lot of women listening who can really, really relate to this and really appreciate seeing and hearing about, excuse me, what's possible. Now, you have a free gift to share with our audience.
I do have a free gift. So I have attached it's actually a free masterclass. It is for women learning how to really tap into their inner worth, into their inner, like, feminine energy, healing their wounds, like learning to attract a masculine energy man. And it is free for your whole audience. So I'm so excited. It's amazing. So many women have taken it, thousands of women by now who have loved it and seen really pivotal shifts. So I'm super excited for them to have that today.
Thank you so much, Darcy. The link to access the masterclass is below the video today. And just in closing out our session, is there anything else you would love to share with our audience?
I just want to say that I know how hard this work is to do. And I know that for a woman to leave and to stay gone is, for many women, the hardest work they will ever do. And I just want you to know that it is worth it. And I believe in you. So thank you so much for having me here tonight. It was so much fun, as always.
Thank you, beautiful. And we'll see you back tomorrow for another Love Transformation class. Bye for now.